The cold Wyoming wind howled mercilessly as Dahlia Norwood's tears froze on her cheeks, her white wedding dress billowing around her like a ghost in the dying light of the fire. She'd been abandoned, left at the altar, then stranded at the stagecoach station when the driver refused to take her back to Cheyenne after nightfall. Now, as the last embers threatened to die completely, she wondered if she might freeze to death before sunrise. The crack of twigs underfoot made her spin around, clutching her thin shawl tighter. A tall figure emerged from the darkness, his silhouette broad-shouldered against the starlit sky. "Madam," came the deep, careful voice, "you shouldn't be out here alone." In the dying firelight, she could make out a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, trail-worn and cautious, studying her with concern in his eyes. "I have nowhere else to be," Dahlia replied, her voice cracking. Without another word, the stranger dropped the bundle of wood he carried and knelt by the fire, skillfully arranging the logs before striking a match. The flames leapt up gratefully, illuminating his face younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and a jaw dusted with stubble. "Isaac Xavier," he introduced himself simply, standing and removing his hat in a gesture of politeness that seemed out of place in the wilderness. "And I'm making you a promise right now. You won't freeze tonight." Dahlia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, suddenly aware of how she must appear a bride with no groom, alone in the wilderness. "Dahlia Norwood," she replied, "and I'm afraid promises don't mean much to me anymore." Wyoming Territory, 1874. The land was as unforgiving as the people who sought to tame it, and Dahlia had just learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Isaac nodded as if he understood completely. "Well, Miss Norwood, my promise comes with firewood, hot coffee, and a safe place to spend the night. The Broken Spoke Ranch is just over that ridge. My employer wouldn't take kindly to me leaving a lady in distress." "I'm not a lady," Dahlia said bitterly. "Just a fool who believed in love." Isaac's face remained impassive, but his eyes softened. "The coffee offer still stands, fool or not." Despite everything, Dahlia found herself smiling faintly. I suppose freezing to death would only give him the satisfaction. Him, Daniel Blackwell, she spat the name like poison. The man who promised to meet me at the church and start a life together. The man who sent a messenger boy with a note instead. Isaac nodded solemnly as he stoked the fire higher. "Some men aren't worthy of the name." As the flames grew stronger, Dahlia noticed the way the firelight caught in Isaac's eyes. They were a startling blue, clear as Wyoming sky. A scar ran along his right cheekbone, and his hands, though they handled the firewood deftly, bore the marks of hard labor. "Do you have a horse?" he asked practically. Dahlia shook her head. "The stage driver left when I couldn't pay the fare back to Cheyenne." Isaac nodded as if this confirmed something for him. "My horse can carry us both to the ranch. It's not far." Dahlia hesitated, years of proper upbringing warring with her desperate situation. "Mr. Xavier, I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly but not unkindly. "There are wolves in these hills, Miss Norwood, and they're not all the four-legged kind." The gravity in his voice made her shiver more than the cold. Isaac stood and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Dahlia took it, surprised by its warmth. "What about the fire?" she asked as he led her toward a chestnut mare tethered nearby. "Let it burn," Isaac replied. "It'll keep the wolves at bay a while longer." He helped her mount first, then swung up behind her, his chest solid against her back. Dahlia felt her cheeks flush at the impropriety of it all, yet what choice did she have? The warmth of the man and horse was infinitely preferable to the cold embrace of the Wyoming night. As they rode through the darkness, Dahlia's wedding dress caught on sagebrush and tumbleweeds, the once pristine fabric tearing away bit by bit, like the dreams she'd carried all the way from Boston. "You're not from around here," Isaac observed over the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. "No," Dahlia admitted. "Boston. I came west when Daniel wrote that he'd made his fortune in the silver mines. We'd been corresponding for 2 years." Isaac's silence spoke volumes. Mail-order brides and long-distance courtships often ended in disappointment or worse. He seemed so sincere in his letters, Dahlia continued, unsure why she was confiding in this stranger. My father died last winter and there was nothing for me in Boston except spinsterhood and poverty. And now, Isaac asked quietly. Dahlia laughed bitterly. Now I have spinsterhood and poverty in Wyoming instead. Wyoming's got more promise than you might think, Isaac replied, and something in his tone made Dahlia wonder about the man whose arms encircled her as he held the reins. The Broken Spoke Ranch appeared like a sanctuary in the wilderness, a sturdy main house with lamplight glowing from the windows, several outbuildings, and a corral where horses nickered softly in the night. As they approached, a dog began to bark, alerting the household to their arrival. The front door opened, spilling golden light into the yard, and a woman's silhouette appeared. "Isaac, that you?" "It's me, Mrs. Donovan," Isaac called back. "I've brought a guest who needs shelter for the night." The woman stepped further into the light silver-haired, with a face lined by sun and hardship, but kind eyes that widened at the sight of Dahlia in her tattered wedding dress. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Donovan breathed. "Get her inside this instant." Within moments, Dahlia found herself seated before a roaring fire in the ranch house kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, with a steaming mug of coffee laced with whiskey in her hands. Mrs. Donovan, the ranch cook and housekeeper, fluttered around her like a mother hen while Isaac explained the situation in low tones to Frank Donovan, the ranch foreman and Mrs. Donovan's husband. "Left at the altar and then the stage, poor lamb," Mrs. Donovan clucked. "Some men ought to be strung up by their bootstraps." "Ellen," Mr. Donovan cautioned his wife with a glance toward Dahlia. "It's all right," Dahlia assured them, the whiskey-laced coffee warming her from the inside. "I'm beginning to think he did me a favor by showing his true character before we wed." Isaac, leaning against the doorframe with his hat in his hands, gave her an approving nod. "The boss won't be back from Cheyenne until next week. Miss Norwood can stay in the spare room until she decides her next move." "Of course she can," Mrs. Donovan agreed. "But first, let's get you out of that dress and into something warm. I've got some things might fit you." Later, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Dahlia sat on the edge of the guest bed, brushing out her long dark hair. The small room was simple but clean, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains that Mrs. Donovan had clearly sewn herself. It was more comfort than Dahlia had expected to find tonight. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Yes, it's Isaac," came the familiar deep voice. "Just checking if you have everything you need." Dahlia tightened the robe around herself and opened the door a crack. Isaac stood in the hallway, freshly washed, his damp hair curling slightly at his neck. He changed into a clean shirt, and without his hat, she could see his face more clearly handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, suddenly conscious of her unbound hair and bare feet. Isaac nodded but made no move to leave. "I was thinking," he said finally, "that tomorrow I could ride into town and send a telegram for you, if there's someone in Boston you'd like to contact." The kindness of the offer made Dahlia's throat tighten. "There's no one," she admitted. "My mother died when I was young. After my father passed, I sold what little we had to pay his debts and buy my ticket west." Isaac's eyes held hers for a long moment. "Then we'll figure something else out," he said simply. "Sleep well, Miss Norwood, Mr. Xavier," she called softly as he turned to go. "Thank you for the fire and the promise." A smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen transforming his solemn face. "Good night, Miss Norwood." When the door closed behind him, Dahlia realized she was still staring at it, her heart beating a little faster than before. Morning came with the sounds of a working ranch rooster's crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, and men calling to one another as they began their daily tasks. Dahlia dressed in clothes Mrs. Donovan had provided, a simple skirt and blouse that had belonged to the ranch owner's late wife, according to the housekeeper. They've been sitting in that chest for 3 years since Mrs. Sullivan passed, Ellen Donovan explained as she helped Dahlia pin up her hair. Shame to let good fabric go to waste, and you're about her size. Over breakfast, Dahlia learned more about the Broken Spoke Ranch and its absent owner, Patrick Sullivan, who was in Cheyenne on business. Isaac was the head wrangler, responsible for the horses and cattle drives. The Donovans had been with the ranch for nearly 15 years and treated it like their own. "What skills do you have, dear?" Mrs. Donovan asked as she poured more coffee. Dahlia hesitated. Her education had prepared her to be a gentleman's wife, not to earn her own living. "I can read and write, I play the piano, I can sew and keep accounts." She looked down at her plate. "Nothing very useful out here, I'm afraid." Mr. Donovan cleared his throat. "Sullivan's been saying we need someone to keep the books proper like. He's too busy with the cattle business and none of us cowboys have the learning for it." Dahlia looked up in surprise. "You mean, there might be work for me here? Can't promise anything until Sullivan returns," the foreman cautioned. "But you're welcome to stay until then. Make yourself useful around the place and we'll put in a good word." Hope, fragile and tentative, bloomed in Dahlia's chest. She glanced at Isaac, who had remained silent during the exchange. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I would be most grateful for the opportunity," she said. After breakfast, Isaac found her on the porch, gazing out at the vast Wyoming landscape so different from Boston's crowded streets. "It grows on you," he said, joining her at the railing. "It's beautiful," Dahlia admitted. "Wild but beautiful." "Like most things worth knowing," Isaac replied, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. "Mr. Donovan mentioned you might show me around the ranch today," Dahlia said, changing the subject. "If it's not too much trouble." "No trouble," Isaac assured her. "Though you might want to borrow some boots from Mrs. Donovan. Those city shoes won't last a day out here." The tour of the Broken Spoke revealed a prosperous operation, hundreds of cattle grazing on the open range, a dozen fine horses in the corrals, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, a blacksmith's forge, and fields where hay grew for winter feed. Throughout, Dahlia noticed how the men deferred to Isaac, seeking his opinion and following his instructions without question. "You seem to command a lot of respect," she observed as they walked back toward the main house. Isaac shrugged. "I've been here 8 years. Started as a hand, worked my way up." "Where were you before that?" His face closed slightly. "Texas, then the war, then drifting." The war. Of course he would have been the right age to fight in the terrible conflict that had torn the nation apart. Dahlia didn't press further. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss. Over the next few days, Dahlia fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Donovan with cooking and mending and spent afternoons in Mr. Sullivan's study, examining the ranch ledgers. The accounts were in disarray, figures didn't add up, expenses were recorded haphazardly, and there was no clear system for tracking profits and losses. "This is a mess," she told Mr. Donovan on the 3rd day. "No wonder Mr. Sullivan is concerned about the ranch's finances." The foreman looked uncomfortable. "Sullivan's a good cattleman, but numbers ain't his strong suit." Dahlia nodded thoughtfully. "With your permission, I'd like to reorganize the books completely, start fresh with proper accounting methods." "If you think it'll help," Donovan agreed, clearly relieved to have someone else tackle the problem. In the evenings, Dahlia often found herself on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Sometimes Isaac would join her, offering quiet companionship after his long days with the cattle and horses. They spoke of small things, the weather, the animals, life on the ranch, but Dahlia found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit. On the 5th night, Isaac brought a guitar to the porch and after some coaxing from Dahlia, played a few melancholy tunes as darkness fell. His fingers moved deftly over the strings, and his voice, when he finally sang, was rich and low. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Dahlia asked when he finished a particularly haunting ballad. Isaac's eyes reflected the last light of day. My mother taught me. She loved music, said it was the only thing that made sense in a senseless world. She sounds wise, Dahlia said softly. She was. The simple past tense told Dahlia everything. Yellow fever took her and my father both when I was 16. That's when I headed west. Impulsively, Dahlia reached out and touched his hand. I'm sorry. Isaac looked down at her hand on his, and for a moment Dahlia thought he might pull away. Instead, he turned his palm upward, his calloused fingers curling around hers. The connection sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the mild evening. We survive, he said simply. The moment was broken by the dinner bell, and they separated quickly, as if caught doing something forbidden. As they walked back to the house, Dahlia was acutely aware of Isaac beside her and the lingering sensation of his hand holding hers. The next morning, a messenger arrived from town with news that Patrick Sullivan would return in 3 days' time. Dahlia felt a knot form in her stomach. What if he had no use for her services? Where would she go? Isaac found her in the study, surrounded by ledgers and looking distressed. Sullivan's a fair man, he said, correctly guessing the source of her worry. He'll recognize the value of what you've done here. Dahlia looked up at him gratefully. I hope so. I've grown fond of the broken spoke. Just the ranch? Isaac asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. Dahlia's heart skipped a beat. The people too, of course, she replied carefully. Isaac took a step into the room, closing the door behind him. Dahlia, he said, using her first name for the first time, if Sullivan doesn't offer you a position, I want you to know there are other options. What options? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been saving to buy my own spread, Isaac said, his eyes never leaving hers. It's not much yet, just a small parcel south of here with a cabin and some grazing land, but it could be a start. Dahlia's breath caught. Mr. Xavier, Isaac, he corrected gently. Isaac, she amended, are you suggesting? He stepped closer until he stood just across the desk from her. I'm not Daniel Blackwell, I don't make promises lightly. But in the short time you've been here, I've come to admire your courage, your intelligence, and your determination. Dahlia stood, her legs unsteady. We barely know each other. I know enough, Isaac replied. I know you're the kind of woman who cries by a dying fire but doesn't give up. I know you're educated and capable. I know when you smile, it changes the whole room. Dahlia felt tears threatening. And what do I know about you, Isaac Xavier? You know I keep my promises, he said simply. The rest you can learn in time if you're willing. Before Dahlia could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Looking out the window, they saw riders approaching a group of men led by a portly figure on a fine black horse. Sullivan, Isaac said, his expression unreadable. He's back early. The next few hours were a blur of activity as the ranch owner returned and was briefed on everything that had transpired during his absence. Patrick Sullivan proved to be a bluff, hearty man in his 50s, with a booming laugh and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. When Dahlia was finally introduced to him, she stood tall despite her nerves. Miss Norwood has reorganized your books, sir, Mr. Donovan explained. Says she can show you where the money's going now. Sullivan's bushy eyebrows rose. Is that so? Well, let's have a look then. For the next hour, Dahlia walked the rancher through the new accounting system she'd implemented, explaining the categories, the tracking methods, and most importantly, where she'd identified potential savings. By my calculations, she concluded, the ranch could increase profits by nearly 20% if these changes are implemented. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. And what would you expect as compensation for this valuable information, Miss Norwood? Dahlia took a deep breath. A position, Mr. Sullivan, as your ranch accountant and bookkeeper. The rancher's laugh filled the study. Direct, I like that. He stroked his beard. I can't afford a full-time bookkeeper, Miss Norwood. Dahlia's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. Perhaps part-time then, combined with other duties. Perhaps, Sullivan agreed, but there's another matter to consider. My ranch hands respect a certain order of things. A single woman living among them creates complications. "I assure you, sir, my behavior has been and will continue to be beyond reproach," Dahlia said stiffly. "I don't doubt it," Sullivan replied, "but perception matters out here, unless—" He glanced toward the window, where Isaac could be seen in the yard, instructing the hands on unloading supplies. "Unless your situation were to change." Dahlia's cheeks burned as she understood his meaning. "Mr. Sullivan, no need to explain," the rancher cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Xavier's a good man, best horseman I've ever employed, been saving for his own place for years." He fixed Dahlia with a knowing look. "Think on it, Miss Norwood, I'll need your answer by tomorrow." That evening, Dahlia avoided Isaac, claiming a headache and taking dinner in her room. Her mind whirled with confusion. Sullivan had all but suggested she needed to marry to secure her position at the ranch, and had unsubtly nominated Isaac for the role. Meanwhile, Isaac himself had hinted at a future together that very morning. Was it possible? Could she consider marriage to a man she'd known less than a week, simply to secure her future? And yet, there was something about Isaac that called to her. A steadiness, a quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time since her father died. As darkness fell, Dahlia slipped out of the house, needing air and solitude to think. She wandered toward the corral where the horses nickered softly in the night. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the ranch. "Couldn't sleep." Isaac's voice came from the shadows. Dahlia startled, then saw him leaning against the corral fence. "No," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." Isaac nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Sullivan made you an offer." "Of sorts," Dahlia said carefully, moving to stand beside him at the fence. "He implied that my position here would be more secure if I were married." In the moonlight, she saw Isaac's jaw tighten. "I see. He mentioned you specifically," Dahlia continued, watching his profile. Isaac turned to face her fully. "And what did you say?" "I said I needed time to think." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken questions. "This morning," Isaac finally said, before Sullivan arrived, "what would your answer have been?" Dahlia's heart pounded. "I don't know," she admitted. "It seemed too soon, too impulsive." "And now it seems like the practical thing to do," she said softly. "But I don't want a marriage of convenience, Isaac. I came west for Daniel Blackwell because his letters made me believe we could have love and partnership. I won't settle for less, even now." Isaac reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What if I told you it wouldn't be settling?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "What if I told you that, from the moment I saw you by that fire, something in me recognized something in you?" Dahlia's breath caught. "I'd say that sounds like one of Daniel's letters, pretty words that may not survive reality." "Then let me show you instead," Isaac murmured, and before Dahlia could respond, he leaned down and kissed her. His lips were warm and sure against hers, his hand gentle at the small of her back. Dahlia had been kissed before, chaste, proper kisses from suitors in Boston, but never like this. Never a kiss that seemed to speak directly to her soul. When they finally broke apart, Dahlia's hands had somehow found their way to Isaac's shoulders, and she was breathing as if she'd run a mile. "That wasn't practical at all," she whispered. Isaac smiled, a full smile that transformed his entire face. "No, madam, that was pure foolishness." "I think I might like foolishness," Dahlia admitted, surprising herself. Isaac's expression grew serious again. "I meant what I said this morning, Dahlia, with or without Sullivan's job offer. I've been alone a long time, drifting from place to place. But seeing you that night, standing by the fire, despite everything, it made me think maybe there are second chances in this life after all." Dahlia thought of all she'd lost and all she'd risked coming west. "I want to believe that's true." "Then believe it," Isaac said simply. "Marry me. Not for Sullivan or the job or even the ranch. Marry me because we both deserve a chance at happiness." Dahlia looked up at this man, this cowboy who had added wood to her fire and made her a promise when she needed it most. In his eyes, she saw the same loneliness she'd carried in her own heart, but also a strength and steadfastness that Daniel had never possessed. "Yes," she said finally, the word feeling right on her lips. Yes, I'll marry you, Isaac Xavier. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, and when he kissed her again, Dahlia knew with certainty that this was no mistake. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in town. It was nothing like the elaborate ceremony Dahlia had planned with Daniel. Instead of a white satin gown, she wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Donovan had helped her sew. Instead of Boston society watching, the guests were ranch hands and townspeople who had quickly welcomed her into their community. But when Isaac stood beside her at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as they spoke their vows, Dahlia knew this marriage had something her planned wedding never would have had: truth. Patrick Sullivan's wedding gift was generous: a 2-year contract for Dahlia's bookkeeping services, to be performed twice weekly at the main house, and his blessing for Isaac to divide his time between the Broken Spoke and their own small ranch. "Can't afford to lose my best wrangler completely," Sullivan had explained gruffly. "But a man should have his own place." Their cabin was small but sturdy, set on a rise overlooking a meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Isaac had been working on it secretly in his spare time, determined to make it ready before bringing Dahlia there as his bride. On their first night as husband and wife, he carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down gently in what would be their home. "It's not much," he said, suddenly uncertain as Dahlia looked around at the simple furnishings and rough-hewn walls. "Not what you're used to in Boston." Dahlia turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "It's perfect," she said sincerely, "because it's ours." Later, as they lay together in the darkness, the intimacy of marriage no longer a mystery between them, Isaac traced patterns on Dahlia's bare shoulder. "I've been thinking about that night we met," he said quietly. "Do you know why I was out there with firewood?" Dahlia turned in his arms to look at him. "I assumed you were traveling between ranches." Isaac shook his head. "I go to that spot sometimes where an old stagecoach station used to be. My mother and I stayed there on our way west before the fever took her. It's where she taught me the last song I ever learned from her." Dahlia's heart ached for the boy he'd been. "So you were there to remember her?" "Yes," Isaac said simply. "But that night I found you instead, a bride crying beside a dying fire." He smiled in the darkness. "Maybe she sent me there." Dahlia kissed him softly. "Then I'm grateful to her." 1 year later, Dahlia stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching Isaac return from the range with their small but growing herd of cattle. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their first child grew. The Broken Spoke books continued to flourish under her management, and Isaac's reputation as a horseman had spread through the territory, bringing offers to train horses for other ranchers. Their own ranch, which they'd named Second Chance, was beginning to prosper. As Isaac dismounted and walked toward her, his face lighting up at the sight of her, Dahlia thought about promises. The broken ones that had led her to Wyoming. The simple one Isaac had made beside a fire: "You won't freeze tonight." And all the promises they'd made since: to love, to cherish, to build a life together. "You look beautiful," Isaac said as he reached her, laying his hand over hers on her stomach. "I look enormous," Dahlia corrected with a laugh. "Beautiful," he insisted, kissing her. "And happy." Dahlia leaned into him, breathing in the scent of leather and horses and home. "Very happy," she assured him. "Who would have thought that being abandoned on my wedding day would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me?" Isaac's arms tightened around her. "I knew at the moment I saw you a woman with enough courage to cry but not to surrender." Dahlia thought of the fire that night, how close it had come to dying out completely before Isaac arrived with wood and warmth and hope. "Promise me something," she asked, looking up at the man who had become her heart's home. "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "Promise me we'll always find each other in the dark." Isaac's kiss was his answer, warm and certain as the Wyoming sun. "That," he murmured against her lips, "is the easiest promise I'll ever make." As the sun set over the western hills, painting the sky in shades of fire, Dahlia and Isaac Xavier stood together on the porch of the home they'd built. the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the frontier itself, a future born from a dying fire, a bundle of wood, and a promise kept.